Welcome back to Shasty Unchained. Today we're watching Andrew Wilson toy with secular humanist and sociologist Dr. Phil Zuckerman on modern day debate. I thought this the perfect opportunity to show how these materialist ideologies are built on pure preference, what I like to call emotional sand. I started studying sociology a couple years ago, and you start realizing it's an entire discipline where the goal is to affirm a victim mentality. And if you start following the logic through in these subjective, relativistic ideologies, it can lead to some really, really bad societies. I put together this graphic for you, the conflict of axioms. Keep this in mind as we dive into the debate. Phil is going to use words like empathy and rights, but I want you to look at the pyramid of utility and follow his logic. Every time Phil says the word rights, watch for the swap. See if he's just replacing God with imaginary preference-based concepts called rights. I think he's standing on sand. Let's see how long he can keep his balance.
Hey everybody, today we're debating Christian ethics versus secular ethics. What is best for society? And we are starting now with Dr. Zuckerman's opening statement. Dr. Phil Zuckerman is a sociologist and professor recognized for his research on secularism, atheism, and how non-religious people find meaning and community. Thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours, Dr. Phil Zuckerman.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for having me. And I hope you don't mind the corncob pipe as my talisman here. And I don't know Andrew, but, I know that the more kind of cantankerous and vicious these debates get, maybe the more clicks they get, but I'm going to try my hardest not to be nasty. And really actually try to engage and understand what you're saying and try to do a good job of finding out where we disagree and why. But so I look forward to this and thanks for sitting down.
So right off rip, notice how he immediately frames the atmosphere. Pulls out his corncob pipe to plant the image of the wise academic in your mind. He virtue signals and frames the online debate world as vicious and performative, essentially. But then proceeds to say how he won't be participating in that kind of show, so that if Andrew comes off aggressive later, he can kind of play the humble, understanding academic being attacked by a bigot, which later on, he actually says Andrew is just seeming with viciousness. Seriously.
I guess for me, I think what's important, when we talk about Christianity or secularism or secular ethics and Christian ethics, these can mean so many different things to so many different people. They're easily strawmanned. We can always find the worst examples of each tradition or each perspective or orientation. I hope we'll try to do.
He immediately gives away that he didn't look into Andrew, his worldview, or his positions at all. Did he even watch any one of Andrew's debates? Probably not.
Try to find the best in each other. But so this is what I mean by these things, and then we can proceed. Like when I think of Christianity, because, there's so many versions of Christianity. There's cultural Christianity. You can talk about Christians in a sociological sense, a cultural sense, a theological sense. So what I mean by Christian is I believe it has these components. It's a worldview that believes in a powerful or magical, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but like...
Oh, yes, you do, Dr. Phil. Oh, yes, you do. They will use this kind of language, magic, Easter Bunny, and all the like, in order to act like the debate just entered fairy tale land, and they are the only adults in the room. They'll tell you no disrespect and then infantilize the faith. They blatantly mock it behind a completely false humility. Notice how dismissive and passive-aggressive he is throughout the entire debate.
Not bound by any limits of the physical realm, a deity, who also seems to exist alongside or allows for the existence of a Satan or a satanic being that torments the world. And I don't know why this God allows him to do that, but somehow they both are out there.
See how he ignorantly mocks Christianity without having done any homework at all on the subject.
There seems to be the belief that this deity had a son who's also himself, who allowed himself, based on a prophecy, to die. And somehow that death and the blood, actually, of that death saves everyone else from eternal torment in hell if they sort of mentally or internally accept him as their savior. And again, I'm saying this as straightforward as I can. I don't mean to characterize this in a comical way.
So everything about this was just bad faith. He even uses the word comically because that's how he thinks of it. And that's how he wants you to think of it too. If you know anything about Christian theology, it isn't about God allowing himself to die based on some prophecy, as he says, but it is the claim that the very reason, logic, and order of the universe, the Logos, took human flesh. This is where the pyramid of the Logos beats the pyramid of utility every single time. If the author of reality became a man, then humanity isn't just some biological accident. We are grounded in objective reality. This was the birth of the Imago Dei. The idea that you have intrinsic value because you are a reflection of the divine. Phil calls it comical because he can't see past the atoms and doesn't even realize how his little lizard brain has been molded by Christian ethics. He thinks rights are just things we vote on in a social contract. But the Incarnation says rights are woven into the very fabric of existence by the author himself. It's not some prophecy trick. It's the bridge between aletheia, truth, at the base of the pyramid, and the God, divine command, at the top.
Nope, that's not how it's coming across. Seems to be a Christian, you need to believe in a heaven and hell, however you define that, but there are definitions that you can work with. A big belief that prayer is an effective mechanism or method by which to change circumstances, change our own personal lives, change the world.
Oh yeah, Dr. Freaking Phil? How do you feel about meditation? But prayer's comical, huh? Well, next he defines secular humanism, and I'm going to let him get through it, get it all out. But I want you guys to keep in mind the pyramid of the Logos.
And that the Bible is true, either word for word or implied or metaphor. I don't know. There's different. I hear different versions. Like it's unerrant. I don't know. But the Bible is somehow this kind of unlike any other thing ever written. It's God's word, or it's inspired by God's word. So that's what I think I mean by Christian. And then what do I mean by secular ethics or secularism? So I would say ethics based on empathy and compassion with no appeal to anything supernatural. We simply appeal to our own experiences and the experiences of others in this world and this life. It's a naturalistic worldview that bases its claims on evidence and reason, and those claims are always subject to change based on new evidence and new reason or more improved thinking. We're very skeptical towards claims of the supernatural, so any ethic or any principle or rule that is based on knowledge. So there are some things we don't know, and those things we have to just humbly say we don't know. Time, space, how it all began, why we're here. I don't know if we'll ever know the answers to that, but I do know what it feels like to be hungry, and I can work from there. Obviously, politically, a separation of church and state, that the government should take a neutral stance. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Beautiful, beautiful articulation of Jeffersonian, respects religion. Government shouldn't be in the business of putting it down or criminalizing it or stopping it out, but also government shouldn't be in the business of promoting it or establishing it. Everybody wins in that situation, rather than if some version of Christianity becomes the state religion. That's going to get ugly very quick for Christians as well. And ultimately, only we can save ourselves. So we are flawed animals, but we also have potential for good. And it's that potential for good which we have to rely on.
Okay, you ready? Okay, you ready, Dr. Phil? Well, clearly his entire worldview is based on feelings and avoiding suffering, responsibility, and accountability of any kind. But I'd ask him about the Navy SEAL training. Do you think those guys suffer at all? So, Dr. Phil, is all suffering bad? And as we've seen, they do appeal to supernatural things and hold axiomatic views. But the thing about evidence and reason is they are about that person's interpretation, right? I think Hitler and St. Teresa, even if they're looking at the same exact data, might see two different things, right? And what happens if a majority of people decided that slavery is now okay again? Or that we shouldn't have free speech anymore? This ideology These relativistic ideologies opened the way for those things to happen as more evidence or quote unquote improved thinking is provided, right? I mean, what is improved thinking? And no, he's wrong. He's not just skeptical. Secular humanists are skeptical of anything they don't like or threatens their individualistic, subjective view of reality. And see how he's allowed to just say, oh, some things we just don't know. But then he'll just expect Christians to grant them these things. And then they mock us for anything of the like. And then he appeals to primal instincts like hunger because it sounds nice and progressive, virtue signaling again. But so what? I know what it feels like to be attracted to another female while being faithful to one woman. I know what it's like to feel jealous, betrayed, and angry. Does that mean I should have cheated on my girlfriend or murked the dude she ended up cheating on me with? No. But why, in his view, would that be wrong? And then with the separation of church and state, like Andrew states later on in the debate, we had the Articles of Confederation before that, and every state had their own religion, minus a couple, I think. But even then, in the Declaration of Independence, the founders knew that rights had to be grounded in something other than just we made them the fuck up. That's why it says, we hold these rights to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights. Not we find people have whatever we make the fuck up. And no, it's not good for everybody. It hasn't been good for everybody. Are you even looking around? Why do you think you're sitting on that stream debating? Because everyone is honky-dory? Nah, bro. Not good for everybody. And Andrew's rebuttal is awesome. He hits on a lot of points I didn't think of, and a few I did, but it's hilarious because I didn't even think it was that aggressive at all. But we almost had a Matt Dillahunty rerun. This guy gets so butthurt. Just watch till after Andrew's opening statement.
And that's where we're at. So what I would argue, those are my definitions. I don't know how much time I have left. So what I would argue is when we're talking about societies, I'm a sociologist. So how do you measure how a society is faring? And who's to say which is a better society or a worse society? Many societies, for example, are not literate. They're oral societies. Are they better or worse than societies that engage in reading and writing? I could make a strong case that I think reading and writing is a better type of society than one that lacks it, but that's subjective, right? If I came from an oral culture, I would find that oral cultures are superior to literate cultures. So who can say, and we'll debate this, but on standard measures of what I would call societal well-being. So what I mean by that is, what do I mean by standard measures? Well, I guess most of us agree that life is preferable to death. So life expectancy, infant mortality rates. Most of us don't like to be the victims of violent crime, so violent crime rates, access to health care, ratio of patient to nurses in a given hospital, access to doctors. Most of us like to have housing. It's no fun to sleep out in the cold, although I guess it could be for some people. But, how do people have access to housing and air conditioning and heat? Do people have access to education? Do people have access to elder care? When someone has a stroke, what kind of care are they able to get or afford or access? These are the kind of things. Are men and women, do they have equal rights in terms of pursuing politics, business, law, owning land, managing their own affairs? Are children protected by laws that keep them from being abused, beaten, or exploited at work? In other words, we could make a list that probably Andrew and I would agree on almost everything. I can think of some things we probably would disagree on, like abortion, or maybe environmental stuff. But I would say the bulk of it having to do with human well-being and alleviating unwanted suffering. When we look at what societies have managed on those fronts,
so just know, all this guy did here was list a ton of things that he prefers, things that he personally lists under the category of human flourishing, and then appeals to most people agreeing, which is a fallacy, by the way. But why are any of these good? And why the hell should I care? And the real problem comes down to those few issues that we do not agree about. Because, and he downplays it, but those few issues are the biggest, most fundamental issues that everything else flows from. And like I said, his definition of well-being and alleviating suffering is purely subjective. And in his words, who's to say what's a better society? Well, it appears that you are the only one who can say what's better, Dr. Phil.
On those fronts, what I would argue is that the most, and these are based on rankings that I don't compile, but other, you can look at, corruption indexes, you can look at human development indexes. I mean, there's a lot of organizations out there, partisan and nonpartisan, that try to chart this information and rank nations. And what you'll find is that most of those nations, not all, most of those nations are post-Christian belief. They tend to be majority cultural Christian, places like Scandinavia, but the vast majority of the population there have dropped the supernatural beliefs that are part and parcel of the Christian worldview. And
so notice his tone, language, and facial expressions. All of this is condescending and kind of placing himself and his secular worldview as the more evolved, sophisticated, optimal worldview over Christianity. He says these places are post-Christian, but that's the point. They are using the fruits of Christian ethics, but removing the roots to which that tree draws its life, which is why we see the emptiness and entropy all around us. The world survived in spite of secularism, not because of it, Dr. Phil.
I don't think that's an accident. And it's not just post-Christian nations, though. It's also post-Buddhist and Shinto societies like Japan or South Korea. In other words, the societies that seem to be faring the best today with the healthiest democracies and whatnot seem to not rely on supernatural Christian beliefs, but rather have moved on to more secular ethics. And those are the things that spurred them to create universal health care, women's rights, public education, like all the things that even democracy itself is a secular ethic. You won't find democracy articulated by Jesus, by Muhammad, by Moses. There's no articulation of government by the consent of the governed until we get to the Enlightenment philosophers who specifically articulate that principle and put it into practice with secular mechanisms. So, James, how am I doing on time? I don't even know.
And Dr. Phil says we have healthcare because of secularism. That's funny. That's historically illiterate. The first public hospitals were built by the church, specifically by St. Basil the Great, because they believed the sick were made in God's image. He then goes to say that because of the Enlightenment and secularism is why we had women's rights, which when it comes to feminism, voting, murdering their own offspring, and wrecking families on a whim, selling their buttholes online, I think, maybe, bro, you're right. But if the majority's view on women changed tomorrow, what then? And many foundational science thinkers like Isaac Newton and Galileo Galilei were devout believers in God. They viewed nature as an orderly creation, reflecting the divine intelligence. And they believed studying science helped them understand God's mind. In the words of C.S. Lewis, man became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a legislator, a lawgiver. And what does improved thinking even mean, bro? Whatever the most people on Earth think is cool, apparently.
Okay, so what I would argue is, I want to be clear here to everybody's watching. I'm not saying the societies that are faring the best right now are doing so solely because of secularism. Not at all. In fact, I could argue that secularism and their diminishing of religion came after they improved their societies and addressed all these societal ills. But I can be sure of is they addressed those societal ills they didn't solve them through prayer or anything magical or appealing to a God. They solved them with their own minds and hands and hearts, and they implemented adequate health care, public education, good elder care, all these things through secular means based on secular ethics, more or less. And that's my opening attempt. We'll see where things go. Thanks so much.
Well, once again, like we just pointed out, nothing about this is true. Completely made up in his head. After Andrew's opening, wait for the hilarious moment where this nearly turned into the rerun of Matt Dillahunty. This guy gets so butthurt that he nearly quits. I thought Andrew went pretty easy on him, but if he went any harder, this guy would have quit for sure. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. With no further ado, Andrew Wilson.
I appreciate that. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. So I don't get to debate with secular humanists as often as I'd like, but it is always amusing for me to do so, especially the particular type I am debating today. Secular humanism is a moronic, self-refuting ideology. Its entire goal is to spare human society from unprovable dogma around higher forms of authority in beings, yet only offers unprovable dogma on higher forms of authority in being. They'll say, look at you, you stupid Christian and your sky daddy, to which I just point out, okay, and you stupid atheist secular humanist and your appeal to my rights daddy. My opponent's entire ideology focuses on the fact that God isn't provable and is untestable and therefore should be rejected. Instead, we should focus on rights, which are unprovable and untestable, and it's ironically just as dogmatic in every conceivable way. Secular humanist dogma includes humans should flourish, that they have rights, that they're all equal, that they deserve a democracy and equal say, and that they should have a representative government. Human rights should be equally given. The list of dogma in their manifestos, Secular Humanism 3 or the Amsterdam Doctrine, are overwhelming. It's really just asking you to reject one religion for another religion. It has its own dogma and its own priors, which secular humanists just grant to themselves as being things that ought to be. When reduced, secular humanism is just force. Do what we say or else. No, says a secular humanist. That's not the case at all. Of course it is. You don't want to serve minorities? Force. Don't want to hire women? Force. Don't want to pay taxes? Force. Don't want to follow their codes of conduct? Force. Don't like their laws? Force. They back up everything with use of force, which aligns with their dogma, and say those Christians over there, you better be careful because they'll use force to back up their dogma. It's actually hilarious. Amazing argument I hear often from my opponents in secular humanism is, well, in a secular nation, you can be a Christian. I've actually heard my opponent say this in multiple of his debates. That's nice. And in a Christian country, you can be a secularist. So what have we established here? So what? What's my proof? Well, sir, you gave it yourself. You said most of this country identifies as being Christian, and yet you're sitting here an avowed atheist. So where's all the persecution at, dude? Nowhere. Now, my opponent will say his view is backed with empirical evidence and that we should use science and empiricism as our basis for rational decisions, which he did, yet can't demonstrate through science or empiricism why we should do that. Because neither thing is designed to make ought claims, which means he's appealing to some other non-material concept. Dignity, rights, vibes, feelings, stuff. Who knows? I don't know what he's appealing to. Who knows? Whatever it is, it's his non-materialist-based sky daddy, his God. If I can't taste it, sir, smell it, sir, hear it, feel it, see it, or test it, or have any evidence for it, it isn't even real from your view. Yet, you say that we should have rights anyway. Whatever those are, and wherever these invisible things you say are rights, which are real, but can't use any of your methodologies that you just gave us to demonstrate that they're real. The list keeps going. How about this dogma of equality? Boy, that flies in the face of all evidence available to us, doesn't it? Every objective thing we can possibly use shows the exact opposite for this. No, people don't have equal value. No, they don't have equal traits. No, they aren't equal at all in strength or IQ or talent or skills or any of the innumerable amounts of traits that we can name, so on and so forth. And yet somehow the secular humanist gets to this, and this is from the agreed upon secular humanist doctrine, which you can find in the latest manifesto, and you can find it in the Amsterdam Doctrine. Human dignity and worth. Every person has intrinsic value, which forms the basis for advocating for equal rights regardless of background, gender, or belief. That's obviously not the case. Observably, it's not the case, and in any form of testing, it isn't the case. So how do we test for intrinsic value again? We don't, right? It's a spiritual concept. You can't. And that's assigning immediately a value to a thing or being just because it exists. How the hell would he test for this? How would you test for the intrinsic value of a human being? You can't. It's all dogma. So they say the same thing. Well, but we can see the effects. And, that's what matters. And that's what he said, right? It's the effects. Which, by the way, this is the entire Christian argument. Yeah, we can see the effects clearly of what Christianity brings. Human dignity, universal morality, outlaws incest, outlaws polygamy, encourages reproduction, outlaws prostitution, frowns on promiscuity, Bans abortion as birth control, gives a sense of community, which assists marriages from falling apart, increases happiness, increases satisfaction in life, lowers negative mental health outcomes, distinguishes clearly between sexes, refuses to lie about the interchangeability of sexes, refuses to grant equality except ontologically, but recognizes differences between people. It increases charitability, gives more loving environment, gives us an evolutionary advantage of an ought for reproduction. It literally does everything that you could ever want for human flourishing. His worldview needs mine to assign these dogmas, but mine doesn't need his. That's the problem with secular humanism. It isn't secular at all. It's a highly religious doctrine and dogma, and it LARPs as being non-religious when its tenets are completely religious and ultimately completely dogmatic. And with that, I'll yield my time, and I'd like to just kind of dive right into the debate.
Now that's what being prepared looks like.
Yeah, I have if you don't mind, I'll give you plenty of opportunity to internally critique my position. I think that that's totally fair. But if you don't mind, I have a few questions for you. Do you believe that human beings have intrinsic value?
Hold on one second, Andrew.
Okay.
I thought this was going to be a good faith debate.
This is good faith.
And I don't know you. Forgive me. I haven't ever seen you before. I'm not a follower. I'm not on social media. So forgive me if I thought this was going to be a debate where your opening sentence would call me a moron.
I didn't call you any names.
Dude.
I didn't call you my opening statement said
opening line was moronic. Are you going
to No. Hang on. I'll read it for you verbatim. I didn't call you any names, sir. I would not do that. I said secular humanism is a moronic ideology. Not that you're a moron, sir.
Andrew?
Bam. Dillahunty moment. Notice his immediate recognition that he stepped into way more than he realized. He was not prepared, which has been obvious. He probably stewed on the moronic statement this whole time, figuring out how to use it as an excuse to get out of the debate. But Andrew was able to coax him back in like a baby throwing a tantrum.
Okay, whatever. What's your question? All I'm going to say is I did not find your opening statement at all in good faith.
What was bad faith about it?
Like you spoke for me, so you looked stuff up and said that I believe this.
I use your words from other debates, so you did say those things. That's what I'm sourcing.
Well, I'm talking to you right now.
So I should forget about your debate last week, or?
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay. I'll forget about everything you've ever said from every time you've advocated for this position to right now. Then, okay.
Andrew, what I'm saying to you is I entered this conversation. I didn't go back and read all the crazy things or great things you've said.
So this here is very important. He says Andrew should forget everything he said to other people. It's hard to remember your mental gymnastics. He now needs to lower the standards of the debate because he was undisciplined. I mean, what kind of person gets mad that you're literally sourcing their own positions? Because he knows Andrew did his homework and he's about to get whooped.
I thought you and I...
That sounds like a lack of preparation on your part, sir. It has no bearing on anything. I prepare for my debate opponents.
So you want to just debate what I said to someone else a year ago?
No, I'm debating your position now on secular humanism as you just outlined it.
I do want to jump in because
I think this guy... Yeah,
I do want to jump in really quick. To be fair, Dr. Zuckerman, is that I don't think it's unreasonable that he read your past work to engage with it during the debate. He was preparing for the debate. If you want to recant, like if you want to say like I no longer believe that, then he can say, oh, now you've updated it. Okay, it's off the table. But I don't understand why it's...
Yeah, I didn't say anything bad faith. I went over
talk about
what secular humanism is. I'm very familiar with the doctrine.
All right.
I don't know.
All I can say is that when I look at the state of our country right now, the hostility, the violence, you're seething with it.
Bam. Dillahunty moment. I have the link for the rest of the video in the description, and it's worth the watch, especially around the 45-minute to 55-minute mark. It highlights this slippery slope they're on with rights and the collective.